beautiful, amazing speakers. Let's make sure I'm live. How was your new year, everyone? Can you believe it's 2024?
Yeah, I know. It was beautiful,
Beautiful
actually.
energy.
All right. I get to unmute. All right, we're set. Welcome. Happy New Year to everyone out there in the world. I'm hoping it's starting off with a fabulous shift and bang in your life, just creating and causing the world in the light that you wish it to be. And today I have with me some beautiful, amazing speakers that are going to talk today on the topic of boundaries. And I want to first off say thank you to Angelica Faith for bringing this topic to my attention. She called me and she's like, I have something in my heart that's been showing up, and boundaries. And I was just like, perfect, because that is something that came up for me too, that I had a different understanding of boundaries than I do now. So this topic I thought was perfect. And then the more and more people that I talk to about the topic, they're like, oh my gosh, that's perfect. And so it seems very good timing for everyone. So we're going to, I don't know, go, I would first of all I'm going to do something different this time around. I would first of all like for you guys all to introduce yourselves, like 5 minutes or so. Just tell me what you do, what brought you here, and yeah.
Okay, do you want me to start?
Go ahead, Cynthia. Yes.
Okay, great. Hello, my name is Cynthia Neo-Benesikwe, and I have Cynthia Sturby's up on the screen. So, boy, I didn't even think of an introduction, but what I've been doing for the last 20 plus years is research and health research specific to Indigenous peoples, trauma, intergenerational trauma, mental health. And so I do that. I've been teaching at a university. I'm slowly moving away from that now, from my professorship. But what I love to do, maybe I just want to focus on that. What I love to do is share with people what I know. And I want to share it if it's going to be helpful to them to do something different. And so my focus in my career and work life was always to increase the quality of life for the people that I work with. And my main people were Indigenous people. And there's a big historical context to that in North America related to genocide and colonial governments and church and state and impoverishment, etc. So I have been working in that for 20 plus years. I am Soto Cree from Treaty 4 in Saskatchewan, Canada. And so everything about the work I do is there's a historic piece, there's a moving forward looking 7 generations piece. And yeah, so mainly the common component with everything I do it because I love it and because I want to share information for the betterment of all peoples. So I'm really happy to be here. Boundaries is near and dear to my heart. And so thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you. That's beautiful. Thank you for your service. And Kelly.
Well, okay. So hi, my name is Kelly Mallinson. I am from Surrey, British Columbia. Cynthia, are you in Saskatchewan?
No, I'm actually in Ontario, Southern Ontario right now.
Okay, cool. And I am I'm a mom of 4. I am an entrepreneur. I just opened up a healing studio. I'm a Reiki master, a medium, and an access bars facilitator. I'm also a medical intuitive and an essential oil coach. So yeah, I just turned 50 this year, and I'm dealing with some really lovely hormone issues at the moment. And yeah, so like I've been in the health and wellness field for over 30 years now. When I worked in dentistry, And I also worked on I was a psych nurse. I'm a former registered psychiatric nurse, and I worked on locked units in hospitals for most of my nursing practice. And the system is broken in all kinds of different ways. And I find I can help people much more in a private way than in like the system. So I had like I had a whole bunch of kids, and then I found myself with having to work 900 hours to keep my nursing license in 6 months, because it was just the way your hours drop off. And I like signed up under somebody to like do some mentorship for being a medium. And it just kind of put me into this like spiritual path. Hold on a second. Stop being like of having like a spiritual, like holistic healing situation where I help people with grief and with like physical issues and various other mental health stuff, like out in the world. Like the mediumship, often people like think that this is like some like evil thing, when it's not. It's actually like messages of love and help, supporting healing and all kinds of things with that. Like there's no like dark energy with that. It's all like love and light. So yeah, so I'm super excited to be here, and thanks for asking me to speak.
Thank you. Wow. Amazing. Angelica.
Wow. Awesome. Yes, yes. Thank you for having me. My name is Angelica. I am currently a transformative neuro-Reiki coach with my mentor. I actually began working with her as a client about 4 years ago. I was really struggling with loving myself in some dark places that I was, and I knew I needed something that was going to be different for me. I was like, I want to be here. I know I'm meant to be here for a reason. And when I began to do the work, it's combining the energy healing of Reiki and neuroscience. So you get to really dive deep and rewrite your stories that you are ingrained in your subconscious and your limiting beliefs, and align, in my experience, to your authentic self. And through this work, I developed such a strong passion for what the outcome gets to be that I wanted to learn what she does and be a coach with her in her program. And really tapping into all that I get to be, and owning my authentic self, and all that comes to the surface with that.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
That's
Doing
cool.
Reiki with neuroscience.
Yeah.
I want to just have a whole hour to talk with all of you guys about what you're doing. You guys are all amazing women in the world, causing and creating change, and like beautiful. I love it. I'm getting the chills just thinking about all the beautiful magic you're creating. All right, so today, so the whole series is about coming home to you. So I love what you said, Angelica, about like your authentic self and like breaking those, because this is really the topic so far for the last 2 weeks, talking about authenticity and then vulnerability. And we realized last week that vulnerability really is tied into authenticity. And so I'm curious to see how boundaries show up for us today in this talk. So first question is, I'm going to ask, when you hear the word boundaries, what comes up for you? You guys can just like talk as it comes up.
Well, initially, boundaries came up as I am going to be mean to you, and not like and like when someone has, up until recently, anytime you talk to me about boundaries, I'd be like, oh, they're mean. They have boundaries. Like they have these rules all around themselves and they're being mean to me. Like I legitimately, that's how I like saw boundaries until I had an incident in my family. Like, and I know that boundaries are good. Okay, so don't get me wrong, but like anytime anyone's ever had a hard boundary with me, I've always been like, because I'm working on myself continually, but I've always been like, oh, they're intense. Why do they have so many rules around themselves? They should calm down. Because I'm like this. I'm a up until now, I'm a people pleasing. I can be a bit of a doormat. So I'm like, oh my God, I have to have rules. Well, yeah, you do, because my dog, due to the lack of leadership from me, bit two people.
Oh,
So interestingly enough, is that like I've been in a leadership program for like 2 years now, and I also got the dog during this time, and I didn't train him, and he decided to become the leader in my house. There was an incident between my daughter and my husband, and the dog got involved, and he like it triggered something in him. And then the next week he bit the neighbor, and then the bylaw officer came over to give us a fine, and the dog busted past my daughter and bit the bylaw officer.
oh,
So yeah, like however, my dog's actually easily trainable and I can actually train someone. So I hired a trainer to help me, and we're like, it's amazing transformation my dog's actually having. So boundaries are like, are not scary. They're not mean. They're none of those things. They're put in place in order to have order and reduce the amount of chaos going on. If there was no rules and no boundaries, life, we would be like living in some crazy world. So I have a new respect for boundaries, and I now have them with my dog. And it's kind of amazing how well he's doing. Like he had something that triggered him and he responded, because that's what animals do. So anyways, he's a lovely dog. He just didn't know where his role was. So there you go. I have boundaries with my dog and the other people in my family, but that's my story about boundaries. But it's been very interesting on how I've got to show up with this in my family and my dog.
yeah, that's it. Thanks, Kelly, for that story. So my first thought is boundaries is about rules. And it's very clear, and you have to know your role. That has always been my idea of boundaries. And then more recently, I read a story about a mom and dad, and they were worried about their son, and he wasn't working, he wasn't studying, he was just doing his thing and free floating in life. And they were concerned because he wasn't doing for himself. So they were like, there's something wrong with him. Like, we got to seriously we have to take him to the doctor, and we have to, and they figure, so anyway, they want to fix him. So this isn't my story, but it's a story, and I think it's an important one. And so the parents went to the doctor, and they spoke about, fixing their son, but he wasn't with them. and they said, and the doctor said, oh, where's your son? And they said, well, he doesn't think he has a problem, so he's not here. And he says, oh, maybe he does. Maybe he does have a problem. Maybe he doesn't. Just tell me a bit more. So the parents continued to talk, and they said, we don't understand. In high school, we made sure he had enough money. And then when he started college, we made sure he had enough money so he could study and he could just focus on the studies. And they started saying everything that they did for their son, but they couldn't understand why he wasn't pulling his weight. He wasn't, doing the job thing, and they couldn't figure it out. And the doctor finally said, you're right. He doesn't have a problem. He doesn't have a problem at all, because he knows where his money comes from, where his food comes from, where his bills get paid. Like, he's having the time of his life. So he he's very obviously intelligent, and he knows where to go when he needs something, and everything's supplied for him. So the doctor said it was the parents that had the problem, and they were like, what? And then the doctor started saying, yeah, we're going to talk about boundaries today. And they're like, what? Boundaries? Well, that was so foreign to them. So he started talking about boundaries and saying that, you know, the boundary. And so the doctors actually that wrote a book, and they were saying that boundaries, and first of all, that we are not responsible for other people, but we are responsible for our decisions. We're responsible for the consequences if we don't make a decision and something happens, there's consequences. And so you have to, the responsibility starts with yourself. So when I read that, I thought that was a really great story, because we all probably have someone in our family or a neighbor or whatever that, we can relate that story to. And so to me, the idea of boundaries, instead of me looking up what's the definition of boundaries, I started to recognize that for me, boundaries is leadership. And so if anything that happens in my life is going to happen because of what I do, then I'm responsible for it. So if I have a sucky life, I'm responsible. I created that sucky life. If I want an extraordinary life, and I am in the process of creating a life that I love a lot more than what I had, in 2020, 21, 22, and maybe even 23. And so I'm creating those shifts, and I'm like, that's a fascinating thing for me, because in a sense, I pivoted from what I thought boundaries were to more of, not that I totally get rid of the idea of rules and knowing your roles, as Kelly expressed. I don't throw that out, but the added piece, which is bigger, is what I do and how I show up in my own life to create any kind of shift that I want and create the life I love. So now I see boundaries as leadership. So anyway, I'll just wait. I'll just leave it at that. And because I could keep talking, so Angelica may want to add to that.
I love it. I love it. And I feel for both of your stories, Kelly and Cynthia, that you shared, it's a beautiful representation of mirrors and ripple effects. So situations that you get to, like the term mirror, of, everybody in your life is a mirror. So they're showing you something within yourself.
Mhm.
And where are you either holding a boundary or not holding a boundary affecting, and that ripple effect of everybody else around you, and how quickly, you holding fast to that boundary can support in that. And 10 years ago, maybe even less, I would have had no idea what a boundary was, because in the past, just like Kelly shared, I was a people pleaser. So I said, whatever you want, I will do for you, sacrificing myself, because whatever you want is more important than me, because my self-worth was very, very small. And now I get to view boundaries as supporting guides leading me to my higher self and in connection to my higher self. Like, what is on this journey of life going to support me in getting to my most authentic self?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, that's
Beautiful. I love how you started with the mirror and ripple effect. That's something that definitely has been present seeing for us, and how we also mirror others, not only in how what shows up for us, but also like there are mirror neurons, right? So if we're watching something on television, we're almost kind of mirroring the feeling and emotions. That's why I stopped watching like horror shows and violent movies, because I was like, the real world isn't stressful enough. Like, I don't want to pay for entertainment to get me all in my body all hyped up, you know, like no. And it does, everything does ripple effect. And sometimes we don't see the effect of the ripple until it's gone so far out. And then at that point, we don't think we had any direct control for that. And because we're so, you know, it's like, well, that wasn't me. But no, like this caused that and that caused that. And all because we weren't clear about boundaries. So I want to read a quick quote from Brené Brown, because she's been my go-to these days. When it comes to vulnerability, she's done a lot of research on emotions. And one of the things she says here is boundaries are not walls or moats that you put around your heart. They are the path to self-respect.
Mm.
And
So
really,
good.
it really is about, it's saying that you're choosing self-love and self-respect over what they might think of you or the possibility of disappointing them. So if people know your boundaries, they know your hard no's. I'm not willing to do that. No, you can't talk to me like that. No, if you're going to use profane language when you want to express yourself because you're upset, I'm going to excuse myself. You can calm down. I'm willing to listen and hear you, but that's my hard boundary of no, I'm not willing to do that. So that's what boundaries, for me at first, boundaries felt like walls, just like she said, right? Or a moat. I'm keeping people out. And so being such a personal person, like I think a few of us said, you know, Kelly definitely said it. I was like, you know, no, I sometimes what would show up, and this is back to what Angelica was saying too about authenticity, and what would show up is that I would have my boundary crossed. Now, we didn't realize it because at the time I didn't know that I needed boundaries, right? Or what my boundaries were, because I wasn't going inward and figuring that out. And then my reaction would be inauthentic because I would be reacting to the lack of having a clear boundary set. And when people don't know what your boundaries are, if they're wishy-washy, that's going to create issues too. You can't just have this boundary with one person, but then let the boundary go with another. Right? Because then it's not really a boundary, it's conditionality is what I would say to that. Like you're conditional. And so boundaries are knowing what is and isn't right for you. Not for the other person, but for you. Like what is right, what feels right and what doesn't feel right. And so when you start to talk about boundaries, it's really just about what you're willing to, I guess, for lack of better words, put up with. What is right for you. You know, there's certain conversations, there are certain ideas, there are certain, you know, things that you're just not willing to go do. And that's a boundary. Go ahead, Cynthia.
Can I just add, I'm reminded of Michael Strasner saying, what in your life are you tolerating? That really hit me. That really hit me because there was and I'll do my best not to get into the story of it because it's so long, but I realized, and it was going over a number of years, when he said that, it hit me so hard because I recognized in that moment that I was tolerating. I simply was tolerating, and that really aligned with something I learned about myself when I was doing my own trauma work, and that is that I'm accommodating. And I also learned that being accommodating, I'm a team player. Of course, I'm going to accommodate, you know, I'm going to listen to everybody and I'm going to be flexible. But this is what I learned, what's underneath accommodating and what I have in common with others on this call is I was a people pleaser. Right. And so I didn't want to rock the boat. I didn't want to make someone, and I have this thing, and it's been with me since I was a wee little girl. I don't want people to feel bad. And I don't want them to feel embarrassed. So I will, like what you said, Angelica, I will sacrifice part of me just so I don't make somebody feel bad. I don't want them to feel embarrassed. So I will sacrifice me. And then after the situation, I will be the one carrying this extra burden. And that's where the authenticity comes in, to be able to be authentic and say, that doesn't feel good to me. Can we negotiate something else, or can we talk this through? Right. And so it can be difficult, especially if the other person doesn't want to talk it through. And sometimes people are like, la, 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 la. They want to pretend it didn't happen. But I am experiencing a shift in that. Is I'm daring myself. And I call it being an agitator. And it doesn't mean I'm trying to make people feel bad. It just means I'm going to break the status quo. I'm not going to be the person that looks away like everybody else and pretends that elephant in the room doesn't exist. And so as the agitator, I'm going to name it. And I'm going to say, oh, there's something happening here that doesn't feel good. And it looks like an elephant. And then, name it. And then, but the amazing thing is, there's people around that are like, oh, thank God somebody said it. Now it gives me permission to say it too, because I don't like that either. Right. And so I think, as for women, especially, since we were just walking, when people are being introduced to us, and maybe we don't want to meet that person because they're a stranger to us, we might be 1 or 1.5 years old. And what are we taught? As babies, we're taught to be nice. What do you mean? Say hi to that person, go give them a hug. And when you force babies to go say hello to someone when they're going like this and to give them a hug, what we're teaching our little ones is to break boundaries, their boundaries. And so when I recognize that, I don't do that with children. If they don't want to meet someone, the adult has to just be an adult and say, oh, that's okay, because a lot of adults, they don't have the boundaries, as we know, right?
And really quickly, I think what that does too is that it teaches children that what they want is not important, and also like to do what is not uncomfortable to do, which
exactly
can get women and children in a lot of trouble. Anyway, go ahead.
But that's how we mess up. Like, the other thing I'm learning, and it relates to boundaries, is how does it feel when that incident is happening, or when somebody says something? How does it feel in my body? And if it doesn't feel right, I should say something, right? So I'm learning to say something, because my body is telling me, as Dr. Vanderkolk says, the body keeps the score. And it can be a traumatizing event. Maybe it just makes you feel bad, but it could be further. It could actually be a trauma, and it'll sit there forever until you work it out and flesh it out, right? Just release it. And there's different ways of doing that. But listening to our bodies and how we feel, I've been doing that more and more. And so we know that the beautiful thing is, when you recognize boundaries and you're moving towards healthy boundaries, when you make a decision or when you say no, as women, we don't have to play nice anymore. We just have to be authentic. So I actually said to somebody a couple of years ago, I'm not going to be anybody's nice Indian, because there's a thing in Canada with Indigenous people that we have our ceremonies, and if you give them tobacco, they'll work for free. And that's actually a thing that some people say in Canada. And I see it in many workplaces where Indigenous people work much, they have like 20-30% higher workload, because they're trying to do reconciliation, and they're way overworking, and those boundaries are being crossed. So not crossing boundaries is using your voice, being authentic. And then when we have to get used to saying no when it's appropriate, and to say how we feel, what we need in that moment. And it's healthy because your body feels good, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the practice of recognizing and what's in your body in that moment, I think, is really important. And that took me a lifetime to figure out that I was ignoring my own signals in my body. When I felt like anxiety in my chest, where I was, I eventually did have full-blown panic attack, but I didn't know what that was. And it was a panic in me that was telling me something's wrong. And I was ignoring that discomfort. And I'm saying, as women, we're taught to be nice, and we're taught to ignore the discomfort. And we're really taught to move through the discomfort. But now I'm saying, as I begin to work with women in a different way, and I didn't mention, but I do also work in the area of grief and transformation, is that as we learn to appreciate our bodies, to love our bodies, to feel what's in it, we are signaled when something is like alarm signal, and then we can change what we were about to do. Right. And then when we make a decision that's good for us, like have a happy dance and celebrate, because we may have said no to someone we never could have said no to before, or we say no to in a work situation where we would have taken on the extra burden and 30 more hours of work or whatever it is. And before we couldn't do that. So I think these things are really important, especially when we work with women, because we are naturally taught to be nice, and being nice is not, it's not 2024. It's not what we do in 2024 is what I say. It's being authentic and real to what's happening with you in that moment.
Yeah, the whole nice thing, like honestly, like so I have someone in my family who's continually pushing my boundaries, and like just I have a 13-year-old who is she's struggling with her hormones as well right now, I suppose, and some other things. And so it's like, I gotta say, I struggle with the having like the hard boundaries with her, because my dog's teaching me how to have boundaries and it's working. But with her, like it's I know where she's coming from, and I can't, like I don't know how to say it. Like, so she's really angry, and I don't really know, like 100, I feel this kind of came through generational stuff for her, not necessarily her experience in life right currently. So she's continually pushing my boundaries and being very difficult, and I I'm working with what's kindness and what's, you know, like holding space for her, as well as like having boundaries. And it's just interesting, like just, I see these, like it's so funny, like when I agreed to talk on this, I was like, like when I think about boundaries, and like if I have a boundary, like I'm currently trying to have a boundary with something, and I keep getting coached around it, and I keep saying, you know what, I actually like, this is what I actually want, and I don't feel heard. So because I haven't had boundaries for a long time, so I'm kind of having a hard time with like saying what I want and being heard about it. And then I feel manipulated, because I'm like, this is my boundary, this is what I want, this is what I'd like to create. And then I get this coaching around it, and I'm like, how come I'm not being heard? Like, how come what I'm saying is not being valued, and like and I'm not being seen? So it's just, and I'm actually really glad I'm saying this out loud right now, because it's really interesting, because I'm legitimately want something, I'm not getting it, and I'm not being heard. And I'm trying to have a boundary. And in the past, when I've had a boundary, I get really mad. Like it's like I have to scream my face off so somebody will actually listen to what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting, but it's like you train people how to treat you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I just find this really interesting, that I'm just listening to what you're saying, and like and like how it's landing in my own body. And I'm like, like this is like, there's something I want, and I would like to create it, and I'm not being heard. So how do I get someone to hear me without me having to freak out? You know what I mean? Like with when like, especially if you're new to having boundaries, like, like Angelica, actually in all of your eyes, what I see is like really empathic women who are like really like very full of love and kind. And I could probably see how like, I can't even see you guys having like this hardcore boundary, like only because I'm like, oh, you're so nice. I feel so like I'm in the presence of all these really nice people. And and it's still funny how no matter, like, even though my experience with my dog, like doing something that hurt someone, that I'm like sitting here going, oh, but having boundaries can be mean. But like it's not mean. Like it's standing up as a leader and like being respected and having respect for other people too, because if we just let people walk all over us, then it's like then we're having like no respect for ourselves. So anyways, I digress. Here's the thing is that it's just, if we want something in our life and we want to cause and create that, how do we do it sometimes without having to scream our faces off? Because we've taught people how to treat us over time. Yeah, so
There's two things I would say to you, Kelly, on this, is that so when I work with people with grief, I do something called a values exercise. And it's like boundaries, we think we know what they are, and values, we think we know what they are. And you say, oh, I stand for kindness, or I stand for this, or I stand for that. But I put people through a 6-part process to identify their values. And then and values can shift and change over time. And again, it doesn't mean you throw out everything that you were raised with, but you adjust them, and you bring some forward when you need to, and then some go to the back. And they're always there to draw on, but different times in your life, your values will shift and adjust. And so this one gentleman, and sorry, I've forgotten his name right now, but he said, we don't question our values. We just say, well, that's what my mom and dad taught me, or that's what my grandma and grandpa taught me. Right? And we don't question it because, why would you question it? But when you do question it, and I put people through a 6-point process to identify their value system and then create their own power statement, I show it to them as a decision-making tool. And then the beauty of it, you don't have to yell and scream. You just have to decide, and it's quick. This is the beauty of once you go through the process, is that your decision making is fast, because you're like, does that align? Does that align with my value system? Yes or no? And it really can be that simple. And I did this with someone who, actually, it's a very similar story to yours, Kelly. And she was having boundary issues with both her grown daughter and her granddaughter, who was about the age of your daughter. So she had 2 women in her family that were crossing boundaries. And after we did the values exercise, I didn't talk to her. We scheduled for a month later, and everything changed. The most amazing thing that changed, I'm like, what happened? You look 10 years younger. And she said, I created boundaries, and I just questioned, does this align with my values? No, it doesn't. And she calmly would say to her daughter and granddaughter, that just doesn't align for me. You don't even have to say it doesn't align with my values. You just know inside your heart that it no longer aligns. And she said, my boundaries have been clear, 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 clear. The anxiety, the stress she was going through with both of them was now eliminated. And they respected her boundaries. And to me, that was a beautiful shift for somebody who was in deep grief. And I can appreciate the reason I'm also involved in grief is because I've experienced so much grief and grieving in my life. And when I was grieving, the one thing I saw is that I had a hard time taking care of myself. So to me, the gift to be able to offer grieving people a process that they can make decisions quickly and efficiently. And it doesn't take a lot of time, because grief can be exhausting, as we know. And compartmentalizing your grief is what I eventually learned to do to move through it, because it was making me ill. I actually thought at one point, and I know others thought at one point, that I was physically going to die, because the grief was so big and heavy, and I had emaciated to a skeleton. And so I learned how to come back to life by compartmentalizing my grief. But then related to that would be, and it took some time, was understanding my own value system and what I stand for. And what I stand for, what I won't allow, right? What I won't allow. And this actually, what I've just expressed to you, and in my own leadership, in my own life, I had another big situation that took a few years to go through, but I was kind of up leveling, knowing what I stood for and what I wouldn't stand for. And I had to make decisions, and I started using the agitator, to create a shift. I wasn't going to follow people just for the sake of following. And when you're in an institutional setting and you're not following the status quo, you are an agitator automatically, because they're like, how come you're not complying? And I was like, well, I couldn't comply because it didn't match my value system. And when you recognize that, you start making different decisions that maybe pull you on a different path, but it definitely is the path you're meant to be on to work towards your bigger vision of the life that you want to create, the life that you love. And I say it specifically that way because there's such a beautiful energy in it to say the life that I love, right? And the life that I'm embracing. And so boundaries, again, for me, is leadership. And that within that leadership, it's understanding my own value system that is a decision-making tool for me. And I can say yes quickly, and I can say no quickly. And there's nothing else to say. I don't need to yell and scream. I just say, yeah, I want to be a part of that, or absolutely not. That doesn't align. And you save a lot of energy that way.
I love that, tying your values to your boundaries, having that be your compass.
Yeah, it's my moral compass.
I love
Yes.
that.
Yes.
Angelica, was there anything that came up for you, love?
Yeah, there was definitely several points in all of these shares that came up, and I love the commonality in a lot of these themes. But I feel that one of the hardest parts about, if you're just starting setting boundaries, is that up until that point, you didn't have boundaries. So the people around you don't fully understand.
Yes.
And I was in a conversation with one of the women in my sisterhood, and she's like, I was, setting my boundaries, and I said it again and again and again. And, the people in your life, they're unfamiliar with this new boundary. So they're used to evoking a specific response, whether that's anger or whether that's a reaction, whatever that is, they're A plus B equals C for them. And now you just switch the equation on them. So they're continually to push that boundary until they get the response that they're used to. So it's a matter of, allowing yourself to stand firm in your boundary and know that not only are you teaching yourself this boundary, you're teaching everybody around you this boundary. So you get to allow grace for yourself and everybody around you the opportunity to get it. And for me, a lot of the work, we do, we base it off of the 7 main chakra points of your body. And, as you said, Cynthia, of your body is your messenger. Your body's holding on to it. So really getting curious at what your body is telling you. And for me, boundaries show up in the root chakra and the throat chakra. So the root chakra is, your foundation, your security, where you get to ground in. And one of the things that, in my experience, when I first started setting boundaries, is I had the fear of abandonment. And I was afraid of standing in that and expressing through my throat chakra what it is I want, for fear that they would leave me. And it's okay if people leave you as you start setting these boundaries, because that they're clearly no longer serving you, and you're shed that and go to the next level. And you know, I feel through the work I've done, throat chakra as a huge breakthrough point for women, because that's our voice, that's our expression, that's where we get to say what we want. And through our history, that hasn't always been allowed. We were silenced. So where do we get to break that silence and express what we want freely, and know that we get to be seen and be heard through that? So
I love how you tied that to the root and throat chakra. I can completely see that, you know, because the root chakra for me is also like survival. What did you learn? What have you been conditioned to be or do to keep yourself safe? You touched upon that, right? And the throat chakra is what allows you to speak your truth. And when we're not speaking our truth, or when we're holding back our truth, is when we start to feel that knot in the throat.
Yes.
Right. There's something here that I wrote down I want to read for those who are listening, because I think we kind of already answered this. So I just want to read it, and then I want to go and ask you all to share what your story was, and what got you to realize that you wanted to create boundaries, or that you had lack of boundaries, which was showing up in creating disconnect in your life. So right here it says, boundaries. Do you see it as an all or nothing, or an everybody else first? Because making your needs a priority feels selfish. I think we said that, right? Feels a little selfish. You're thinking, and it says having healthy boundaries isn't about not caring about others' needs. I'll say that again. It's not about that you don't care about their needs. It is simply to make yours as equal as theirs, making your priorities as equal as the ones that you make others. And for us, since we're all here in this call, people pleasers, that's huge.
Yeah.
To be like, hey, I'm making you more important than me. I get to just shift that. It's not about closing yourself off or being bitchy. It's about like, hey, I care enough about you. And now it's time that I care enough about myself to create these boundaries. And I love what you said, Angelica, about like, and I think Kelly, you said it earlier, we train people on how to treat us. And you said that, Angelica, about like, when you create new boundaries, it's going to take a while for them to understand what's happening. Like, wait, ABC used to be, 1 + 2 used to equal 3. Now it's like, I don't know what it is. What's going on? And just having the grace, like you said, having grace, not just with yourself, but with others, and having them just kind of understand, and then speaking your truth and saying, hey, I know that before, this might be weird, or whatever comes up truthfully for you in that moment. I think if somebody would say that to me, I was like, yeah, I understand that before. I this is a new thing for me. So I'm realizing it wasn't working. But how I was being before, being a yes to this, wasn't working for me, because it's not aligning with my life and my values, or what it is that I want to create in the world. And there's power there. And I think when you are able to speak your truth like that in a neutral space, not that I need to be right space, but just neutral, like it's a fact. It's a fact. I'm not trying to convince you. I'm just telling you the facts here. People start to respect you. And then when we start to shift, we start to experience other people shifting.
Yes.
Because it's also the energy we're giving them. Like, I know that the way that I'm responding by having those boundaries now, when people come to me in their anger and want to yell at me because for whatever reason, right? They're stressing out, just because it's life, right? People stress out and they want to have a scapegoat. And we usually treat the people closest to us the worst, because we know that they love us unconditionally, and they get to see us in our worst possible and our best. And in those moments where I used to take it personally, I now come and go, oh wow, I see you're upset. And I know And maybe I'll say it and I feel like you're taking it out on me and I know it's not about me.
Mhm.
And I'm here and I'm sorry that you're going through this. I can totally see why you're upset or why you're having a meltdown. I'm here to talk to you when you're ready to talk. And I see you, just like acknowledging them, that you hear them in their state without letting them get away with it, right? It's not about letting them getting away with it. It's almost like just saying, hey, I see you. And I'm thinking you're kind of being rude and I know it's not about me.
Mhm.
And so when you want to talk, I'm here. And then you know what that does is like in 5 minutes, I realized that they have been shifted simply because I didn't feed into the energy of
Yes.
stress, frustration, and whatever that is, because I made it about me. And I'm in that moment when I kept it about them and I said, I have a boundary, but I'm also here because I love you.
Mm.
You get to be frustrated, you get to feel all this ways, but you don't get to reflect it on me and talk shit to me and make
Yeah.
me feel bad, belittle me in any way. I didn't do anything. Right. And so when I'm able to just be like, I see you and I hear you and I love you and I'm sorry. Like it really, and I walk away and I go, but this is not me. This is not because of me. So I'm gonna walk away. When you want to talk about it, we can talk about it. And that's given me so much freedom in hardship. You know, like I'm not going through the same stuff of self beat up and wondering why I can't get out of my own way. A lot of the times it's not even me. Like I'm showing up in my authentic way and being joyful. And yeah, I'm gonna mess up. And yes, I'm gonna say something that triggers someone. But in that moment, I realized it's really not me doing anything wrong. It's just it's triggering them because they don't have boundaries.
Mhm.
They have limiting belief. You know, and when we can start to see our lives as just being neutral and being responsible with boundaries and allowing yourself vulnerability and to be authentic, not the only thing that's being created there is connection and love,
Mhm.
which is all what we're all seeking in the world.
Absolutely.
Connection and love, and to feel like we fit in and belong somewhere.
Yeah, Margarita, as you were speaking there, one of the things that came up for me that really supports everything that you were saying is negotiation. So even if your partner or someone else is upset, you can say, I can't hear you right now because maybe the language they're using doesn't, you know, you're kind of closing your ears. Say, I hear you, but you can absolutely speak to what you're observing. I hear you're upset. And I do want to talk to you about this because it's hard to see you upset, but I can speak to you in an hour, or I can speak to you. And with my partner, sometimes I say I'm witnessing that there's maybe some mental health issues today. And he started doing that for himself. And we openly speak like that. And I say, well, maybe you just need to do a little self-care. And then we can talk about this again in an hour so that he knows I'm not leaving you. I'm not abandoning you. I do want to hear what you say. And that is probably, in terms of boundaries, one of the biggest gifts that we started doing for each other. And he'll go and do his thing for an hour. And then we'll even set a time and say, okay, we'll do this at 4 o'clock. Or we'll do it tomorrow morning and we'll go for breakfast and we'll talk it out then, you know.
Love that.
And so
Coming back,
the
not feeling
idea of negotiation within boundaries is beautiful. And it always sees to work.
Yeah, and it works great for people like me. I know I forget who it was who talked about abandonment issues. And Angelica, that was you. And I was like, yeah, that's just like me. I have and it's something that I'm just realizing recently. Because obviously, you know, I'm doing the work inside now, and I was like, wow, I guess, yeah, you're right. I do have abandonment issues. And it's so interesting how they show up.
Mhm.
Well, that's a real thing. So so when you are worrying that if you have a boundary that you're going to be abandoned, like, well, that's horrible. Like, what, like and light bulb moment, no kid, most children are not going to ditch their parents. They have to rely on them to pay for them, at least for the next 5 years. And with this economy, maybe even longer. So what interesting. So I've been like thinking, like, so I have like 8 hats that I wear. And in my business, I'm seen very differently than I am being seen by this one particular child in my family. Like, so like with her, she like in like if I go do a healing session on someone, or if I'm in this conversation with you guys, like I'm like, or I'm, doing my other business, like I'm quite well respected and seen as a leader. But with my own kid, it's like, she like rips me down because when I was in grade 7, I was bullied by this horrible girl. And it's like, I need to release that trauma somehow, because this is what it's just triggering it with me like all the time. And like, no matter what, like I see her as this girl who bullied me in grade 7. And this is like, but she's not going to leave me. Like, she's not going to, like, so this girl created a space where nobody talked to me for like 4 months in grade 7. I was like, no one can't buy me love, when they're all like, we don't know you, you're a loser. Like, that was me for like a few months when I was 12. And so like, but like, I'm thinking, what if she runs away? What if she does this? What, like, all, like, I go to all the like wrongness of what she could do, but what if she didn't do any of those things, and I'm just making up some stupid story that what's going to be created if I like have a rule with her, like, interesting.
So what is it that is holding you back from these boundaries with her? I know that, how long have you been working on boundaries with her? Have you been working on boundaries with her? These are all the questions that come up for me with you and your daughter.
Right. No, I have been, but like every time I say one or do one, she says no, but then she'll do what I say. It's interesting. It's like, so I'm having a boundary, she's saying no, and then like I think, oh God, she's good. Like, I go into all like the fear around it, and then and the victim part of it. Like, so I go into those places, and then, but then she'll like do what I say. Like, so I'll be like, you can't do that. And this is the only time I can pick you up from that. And she's like, well, I'm not coming home then. And I'm like, well, I'll be picking you up at this time. And she always shows up. Like, so it's not like she's actually going to do the thing she says she's going to do, but whatever. So it's just interesting. So like every time I put up a boundary and like don't be the people pleaser with her, she actually comes up. So it's just really exhausting, not gonna lie. It's actually like extremely like not fun, but she's worth it, and I'm worth it, and that's really at the bottom line of it all. And I guess for the and I've been probably working on these boundaries for the last like year, but she just keeps amping up her behavior, like to like beyond what I can even imagine. Why I don't even. Anyways, it's like the universe is saying, step up, step up, step up, step up. Okay, I'm coming. Like, and it just keeps raising the bar. But yeah. So anyways, that's all I have to say about that. And I think I have to go clear some trauma around some of this. And I'm gonna have to go pretty quick because I have a chiropractor appointment, because my root chakra is being continually menaced with because of my continually working on this stuff. So so you guys, I've really loved this conversation a lot, and you guys are also lovely, and I'd like to be around you much more often.
Kelly,
Yes.
it's great to meet you, and I
Thank you, Kelly, for
appreciate you sharing your story. And yeah, I hope that we can be on another session together.
Yeah, for sure.
And let me know how I can support you in working out that 7th grade trauma.
Yes.
Yeah, there's
Sure.
a breakthrough for both you and your daughter in this, Kelly. And just stay curious with yourself, because you're the starting point of healing. And know that anger is a surface level emotion, and you get to get curious, or your daughter also gets to get curious when she wants to, on what's underneath of that.
Right, for sure. Yeah, thanks. All right, guys. Love you forever. See you later.
Yes.
One of the things, maybe I didn't want to start it, but and be dropped off with Kelly, but the beautiful part about healing work is because moms are always energetically connected to their babies, to their children, no matter how old they get, is that when a mom does her healing work, it immediately translates to her daughter. Her daughters, when the mom heals, the daughter, if she's carrying anything, it will go away.
Would it happen with our mothers as well? Does it heal the lineage above us or just the?
Oh, yeah. I think so. In my family, as we each do our work, my mother, who was severely traumatized at Indian residential school, and that's a whole other topic, but where they had no boundaries, that's for sure. And so she was really traumatized, as were all the children in the community by going there. And she never did any healing work per se, right? Because she was of the era, you just soldier on. And so as her daughters, as we did work, we did notice how our mother was different. So it can kind of go both ways. Ideally, if the mother's doing it, it translates to all her children. Kind of like this energetic wave, or you could think of it as an umbilical cord feeding the healing work, however you want to visualize that. And yeah, so we do see shifts in our family for sure.
Yeah. Thank you, Angelica. So do you guys have I know that you guys all have a time constraint. Who has to jump off first? Because I want you to be able to share what came up for you with boundaries and why you created them.
Mine is at 1:30. I'll be leaving at 1:30.
I can stay on longer. So Cynthia, you can go first.
Okay. And what was the question? What came up?
What was when I asked you to talk on boundaries, you shared a story, and what caused you to understand that you were either lacking in boundaries and why it was important for you, or maybe there was a story when you started to create boundaries, what shifted. I think maybe that's better. When you started to create boundaries, what did you see shift and in your life change, and how did your life change because of that?
Yeah, well, I'm actually going to kind of answer them. You asked it two different ways because I think it kind of bookends or whatever. For me, there was a pattern when I look at my life. And it's interesting because in conversation with my brother, he and I were saying the same thing, and we wondered why certain things in life would happen and why we couldn't really get what we wanted. And that was a big question for both of us. And then there were certain things. They say that when you spend a lot of time with people, whether it be in a workplace or maybe a group or whatever, sometimes that group dynamic or your coworkers start to act in the way that your family acted. And so there were boundary issues in our family for sure, because as a fourth generation descendant of 3 generations of residential school survivors, and maybe I do have to put 30 seconds of explanation there. Residential schools in Canada began in both the United States and Canada to kill the Indian and the child. So it really was a way to get rid of a race of people that settlers didn't understand the spirituality, right? There's religion in Western world and Indigenous, it's spirituality, and they didn't understand, or ceremony. But there was also a land grab because they were new settlers to the land. So if all Indigenous people either became imitation Europeans, we would agree with the new governments that came in. Interestingly, that isn't exactly what happened. Some agree, some don't. But the idea of for kids who have parents that are residential school survivors, it is kind of a common question. How come we can't have what we want? And as I said, there were lines crossed at residential schools. It was a really horrific place filled with abuse on all levels. And so within the family homes of residential school survivors, the boundaries weren't clear, right? And so we didn't get to learn boundaries too clear from even our own mother. right? So we had to figure it out in our own life. And in a work-related situation, I had 3 different times, similar, different workplaces, but a similar thing happen. And I was just like, I don't understand why that keeps happening. But as I'm building my leadership, again, as I said at the beginning, to me, leadership is boundary setting. You know who you are, you know what you stand for in terms of my own values, does whatever align. And if things don't align, sometimes it's heartbreaking, but I've come to see when things don't align and I have to exit that where I was, it feels sad at the beginning and there could be some grief, but it only means that if my values don't align, I'm not supposed to be there. And also, I cannot achieve what I want to achieve in an environment where my values don't align with others. And so I have to leave. And it is worth celebrating because you can take your vision bigger. You can take your vision bigger. Sometimes I've recognized that my vision was too small. And then sometimes I recognize that when I made my vision big, sometimes the people around me didn't like it. And they would say things. And so it's interesting. If it's too small, you got to make it bigger. And if it's too big and the people around you don't like it, you're not meant to be around them. You have to go elsewhere and surround yourself with people who you are on the same vibration.
Higher
right?
standards.
Yeah, you just have to lift it up. And so that's really what I've been learning. If I took a piece of paper and drew when boundaries get crossed, I would put down is when I'm accommodating, because that means I don't want to rock the boat and I'm being a people pleaser, right? And then if you're a people pleaser and that's what validates you, then it's only short term, right? It's hard to go forward in a bigger way if you're a people pleaser, because the truth of it is, to be a visionary, you have to go outside the box and you can't think like other people. You have to be original in your thought and it has to be deep in your heart, and nobody can do that but you. And it doesn't mean you can't have partners, because even on this call, I see the linkages between us. None of us are exactly the same as the other person, but we certainly have linkages, and we can develop these partnerships to create our own visions separately, but be supportive of someone else's vision as well. So I think boundaries really is about leadership. So I said one side, if your boundaries are crossed, you're accommodating, you're people pleasing, you might be trying to maintain the status quo, and you could also be feeling really icky in your body. And then you've got the other side, is that what are healthy boundaries? When you make a decision, you're clear. It's not hard. You can make a decision easily and clearly. You can stand firm in who you are, what you believe in, and it feels good. It's celebrating. You're not trying to be a soldier and go through a harsh feel, like that ugly feeling in your body. That's not what it's about. It's about celebrating and creating. And so those are healthy boundaries. You get to celebrate healthy boundaries. And the beautiful thing about healthy boundaries, when others, it might be hard, you might lose a few people, because they're like, oh, they might not think of it as boundaries, but they won't like it. And so their energy vibration is lower than yours. It's time for them to leave. But when people, they can adjust their own attitude to align with your new boundaries too, then there's a respect and a love that's generated that wasn't there before. And I'm also experiencing that. And so this idea of leadership is boundary setting is really strong for me now. And this clarity has only been recent for me, because in my situation where I realized my values didn't align, I had to make some big decisions and stay with them until they came to fruition. And I'm very proud of that. It doesn't mean it was easy, but I'm very proud of that. And I will never back down from setting my own values, thus setting my own boundaries. I will not change. I will not go back to what was, because this life is more fruitful, and there's more possibility in it than it was before. So those are some things that came up for me.
More possibilities. Who doesn't want more possibilities?
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah. And my word for 2024 is expansion. So possibilities
Yeah.
flows with expansion. And at this moment, any of us here, we cannot imagine yet what expansion will be in our lives if we're focused on possibility, right? And so it would be interesting for us to have a December call and maybe, to speak about boundaries in terms of the good things that happen in setting boundaries and how things shifted and changed for us, like at the end of the year. That would be fascinating to me. And you can put that, then you can put it up at the beginning of the year and the end of the year special.
Text the bookends, like you said earlier. What comes up for me when I hear the word expansion is, for some reason, the image that comes in is to go inward. To go inward into you, intimacy, into me you see, so that I can understand myself and how to expand, like more love, like having love for myself expands my love.
Yes.
Having boundaries for myself expands possibilities.
Yeah.
Right. So like, I don't know if that makes sense for you guys, but for some reason I just
absolutely
got of like going
absolutely, because it starts with us. It starts with us, right? Leadership is self-responsibility. We are responsible for everything. And as Angelica said, when there's some challenges with other people, they're mirroring, what are you doing or not doing that creates that? And so we can change our own habits to create better, stronger, healthier boundaries, right? And move forward in a good way, because it's through boundaries that those possibilities exist, and you create these connections with other people. And so it kind of starts with boundaries. It starts inner self-love, and it can roll and get bigger and bigger. And that is your vision. How big can you make it? And so there's the expansion piece within and also outside ourselves.
As within, so without. That's like,
Well, something that, I've definitely spoken on with some women in our group and through the work that we've done is that, there's women that have come into the group and they want that high connection to the divine and their higher self. And in order to do that, you do get to connect with yourself and ground in. And not in like a super heavy way, but ground in who you are in order to go up. So you have to ground down in order to rise.
Yeah.
And expand. And in some of the work that we do, we talk about manifesting, and you want to manifest and dream big and set those goals big, because if it's not scary and nerve-wracking, then it's not big enough, right? So what we talk about is like that goal, that manifestation, that dream, that's up here, and where you are could be anywhere here, but in between is the gap healing of that vibrational healing that gets to happen. So Cynthia, when you were sharing, like these situations kept coming up for you at different places, but similar trends, for me, what rang true was that it was the growth opportunity showing itself for something that you got to break through to bring yourself to that like next level. So though we can manifest anything instantly, there's that gap healing. So if you're here and it's here, you're going to hit that way faster than if it's here and here, but you still get to heal that gap, if that makes sense, of that growth to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Thank you, Angelica.
Yeah.
And so for you, Angelica, what came up for you when you started bringing up boundaries? What shifted, and that has there been a change since you started putting up boundaries?
Yes. Well, I do want to say that the growth work, the transformational work, the boundaries, it's ever going. There's always a next level of it. There are times, which is the whole reason that this was brought up, that I forgot to hold my boundaries, and I didn't know it consciously until I was like, I don't feel good. I don't feel in alignment with myself. I'm miserable. What happened? And so going back, my basis is, what do I want to create? What do I want to create in my day? And what does that feel like? What does that look like? So I find the things that bring me joy, that are in alignment with me, whether that's, connecting with nature, pulling cards, doing a ritual, some self-love, whatever that is. So I create these rituals that fill me up. And for me, a boundary that was lapsing was, not creating that intentional space for myself, and people pleasing and giving, and giving to everybody else before myself. And I ended up working, I was in a job transition, so I ended up having a lot of time for myself to zero time for myself, because I was waking up, going to work, because I got to work from home, and then going to bed. So I was working 10, 12 hours. And I was like, this isn't serving me. And I realized, I was like, because I let my boundary I crossed my own boundary in that, but because I was looking to please, to show my worth. And I was like, oh, because I do this work, I got to ask myself those quality questions of, what's underneath of this? What do I get to do to go back into alignment with what is serving me to my highest good in this moment?
Yeah, I love that. And I just like to add to that, with respect to creating boundaries, because again, at the beginning of today, for me, I thought I knew what boundaries were. And so the biggest thing I think that came from it, and we had lots of things that we discussed today, is that I had asked the question, how come I can't have what I want? And so I recognize now that I actually can create what I want, and I can create the life I love, and I can create the space and time for my self-care. So in my younger years, I was an athlete. I don't know, there's someone just jumped on. I don't know if that's my sister, Patricia, but when we were in high school, we were athletic, and she, I was a runner, I was a sprinter, long distance. She was a javelin thrower. And so that was important to us, was our physical, right? And we rode bikes, we'd ride from the country to the city. And so we were very athletic. And when I found as an adult, is a lot of my physicality, like taking care of myself that way, was out the door. I wasn't taking care of myself the same. So creating boundaries, especially in a work-related situation. Oh, there she is. Hey, Patricia. And so creating boundaries, and Shonda talks about flex time. So I haven't been as specific with flex time, but I know, like, after I do travel and I'm traveling for a week, I come home, I know the next 3 days is my time. Right. And so I'm being more consistent with that. And that allows us to give, someone said to me recently, make sure that your teacup is full before you start offering to help others. And if at that moment you can't, I mentioned the word negotiation, to say, I can't do that today because I'm, resting or whatever, but I could do it in 2 days. So we always have that gift of negotiation, with ourselves, but also with others around us. And so just in totality, the idea of boundary setting and how it relates to creating a life that you love, that you thrive in, because I can tell you, for decades, I was completely exhausted, not understanding it. And I now believe it's because I didn't have strong boundaries.
And one of the things that happens, I think, without honest communication and vulnerability, and lets the situation fester and escalate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So without setting healthy boundaries, that's what can happen. So we get to do them immediately. And when you and in the moments like this is where we get to have grace with ourselves and also to be like honest. If a boundary shows up, like something happens and you realize, oh wow, I just heard this talk on boundaries and I'm realizing that is something I don't have boundaries on, and this keeps showing up in my life. And I hate how I show up when this boundary comes up because I become a whatever victim. I have abandonment issues. Whatever shows up for you in your limiting belief is what's going to come up because you're not being authentic with yourself about it. Maybe you didn't realize it. Like I think Cynthia, you said it earlier, like you didn't realize that you didn't have what boundaries, and me too. I didn't realize that I wasn't setting boundaries for myself. And so so in doing that, you're just like, oh my gosh, you know what I just realized? I don't have a boundary set up. This is not okay with me. This
Yeah.
right here is not okay with me. You asking me to do that is not okay with me. And I've been saying it, I've been a yes up until now, but I'm realizing that it was not aligning with my truth, and it's creating discord,
Mhm.
resentment, and
Yeah,
maybe
and I
even
think it's
physical pain
important to
and emotional pain, you know?
And I think it's important to mention, Margarita, with boundaries that, because in looking for a definition, I started out on the call that, I thought it was one thing. I thought it was really hard, fast rules, but I really see boundaries as leadership now and self-responsibility. And so, we can use the analogy, I mentioned travel, that we've all been on airplanes and we know when they teach us when the oxygen masks, if they ever fall, you put on yourself first, and then you can help others. It's the same with boundaries, right? We have to have boundaries because it's taking care of ourselves first, and then we can help others. But I think the challenge is that many people don't recognize they don't have boundaries because, especially for women, we think we have to be nice.
Yeah, we see them as walls. I know that there was somebody who was going to be on the call today who was going to be on the opposite side. She goes, I don't believe in boundaries. I don't have boundaries. I think they're a negative thing. And so I was like, I am curious to have you on the call. That's beautiful because I'm sure there are a lot of people just like you out there.
Yeah.
Let's have this conversation.
Yeah.
And
I feel that it gets to come from like, what is your intention of that boundary? Because I have written down when I was thinking about boundaries, like your rigid boundaries or like your lack of boundaries. So like, what is the intention of it? Because a lot of people use boundaries in, I don't want to say a negative way. It's
righteous.
Okay, Angelica, you can say it.
Well, I mean, I want to say they use it as, I'm going to say, a protection mechanism to create that wall, to create that disconnection, because they don't want to be hurt in that moment. So there are people who use and say the word boundary, but it literally is just a wall of protection. And Cynthia, as you said, a resourceful boundary is one that feels good, one that feels good in your body, that I'm going to say that lights you up, that literally will serve you to your highest good and others around you. And, if it is triggering to somebody else when you set that boundary, you get to say, okay, well, my intention with this boundary is this. I didn't say it. I didn't mean to express it in any way of malicious intent. So let's have a communication, a dialogue on what this is. Because, there's times I've said something and it didn't come across how it wasn't received how I intended, but I know what it was that I meant. So I'm like, okay, what is it that you're hearing me say in this moment? And what do we get to shift, or what can I elaborate on to make it that you can understand what it is that I'm expressing?
I love
Yeah,
that you
that's
asked them, what are you hearing me say? That's something that's coming up a lot for me. Not that it's coming up for me, but every time I hear it, it sticks, right? Because that's like, for me, I realize so often we assume we know what the person means instead of just asking, what I'm hearing you say is this, and getting an acknowledgement.
Mm.
How many times have we, done that where we're assuming, maybe sometimes it's somebody assumes it on you, right? And then you're sitting there going, well, what happened? I didn't mean, I wasn't, what? And then you get so confused and you get yourself beat up, and then you get to the place of like, I don't know what I did. I was just, then sometimes after a while we start to say, well, maybe I shouldn't say that again because it might create this scenario again, instead of just going, hey, and being, calling the elephant out, like you said, calling the elephant out and going, hey, I feel like something shifted. Can you please express to me, like, if there's something that I said or did?
Yes.
Just opening the conversation. And that goes back down to being vulnerable, yet authentic. Right?
And
Because
open.
and open. And then being neutral with whatever comes up for them and not getting defensive. Because then that creates distrust in them. Well, you just told me to come tell you, and now you're going to be bitch and be mad at me for telling you my truth.
Yeah, and even just because it's their truth doesn't mean that it has to be your truth. So you don't have to own it. And I think that's a huge thing of like, that's their opinion, and it doesn't mean that you have to own that, and that's okay. That's just what it is. You don't have to carry that on you. And then if it does land, then again, you get to be curious and be like, okay, so like, I don't like that landed. What's coming up? Because like where you are in one area of your life is throughout your life. So it may not be in that moment, but if it's being triggered, it could be in another part of your life that you're not consciously aware of.
Right. And it comes back down to me when you say that, Angelica, is intentionality. Like, be honest with yourself about what your actual intention was when you said something, or when you create that boundary. Like, what was the intention? Because I think we talked about it last time, when you could say the words, but the energy behind it is the intention. And that's what people pick up on. And so a lot of the times we're sitting here trying to defend ourselves, but if we drop in and go, well, when I said that, well, what really was my intention in saying that? Oh, I could see why they think that. I could see how they feel that, because it was not really aligned with my truth. I was trying to pretend in that moment to say something that was really not my truth. And I think for me, like, there's always a moment that's going to come up, but they're followed by a moment to clean up. Like, it should never fester. If you're really being honest and connected and listening, like, you always see a shift in them. Their eyes change, their shoulders go up, or they come down because they feel defeated or not heard or not seen, or they recoil, or maybe they get concave because they feel embarrassed, or like, there are physical and verbal cues that we get from the people that we're with. And then instead of just acknowledging that, we want to like pretend it wasn't there, and then we wonder why we're not having relationships at 10-10 like we want. But it really is about going to yourself first, because you don't know what it looks like until you do it for yourself. You don't know what it feels like until you start filling yourself up. You're not sure what you're really capable of until you start to do it for yourself. And you'll start to see, like, wow, this is empowering. Like, a word that came up for me is like how to be empowering with what you say and your boundaries. Boundaries should be empowering.
Yes, absolutely. I'll give one example. A short version of the story is that late in the summer, I had this prophetic dream. And in my dream, I said out loud, why am I waiting for someone else to make a decision before I move forward with my life? I remember all the details of the dream. I woke up and there was some stuff going on. And I called my doctor's office and said I was going to be there that afternoon. And what I did, so to make a big story smaller, there was a traumatizing event, and I was working on the trauma, and then there was something else that would happen that would kind of fuel it again. I was trying to work it through, and I was getting really, really tired. And so when I woke up that morning and I had that aha moment, because I was waiting for other people to make a decision, I then decided to make a decision for myself that day. And I made an appointment at my doctor's office. I went to the doctor's, I got a note, and I put myself on medical leave. And then I flew out of the country and the location I went to was Ireland, but it wasn't because it was Ireland. It was because the people that I wanted to see were there at that time. And I could have flown to British Columbia, but they weren't there. They were in Ireland. So I went to Ireland, and I spent 2 weeks with them and a small group of people to work through my trauma. It was so empowering to do that, because it was about self-care, and it was me taking responsibility for me, but I was waiting for a long time for others to make decisions. And it's exactly like I said in my dream, why am I waiting for others to make a decision before I move forward? And I thought, no, I don't have to do that. It was an aha moment. And when I did that, I got to work through a lot of trauma. I got to develop new relationships that I'm still connected with those same people today. And when I was there, I was walking, we all did at different times. We walked along the sea, we jumped into the sea, and the scene was like a postcard. And I had to keep saying to myself, I created this, I made this happen. And I was looking around, and I was just in awe of the beauty around me. And then I got to meet the most incredible people through that experience as well. And I also thought, I want to create more experiences like this in my life, because it's not about stuff for me. It's not about stuff and materialism. Although I have to admit, I'm always going to have a beautiful home to call home, but it's about creating experiences, because when 5 years goes by and you look back, you go, I remember walking with him along the sea, in Dungarvan, or I remember, and one of the things coming up, and one of my big goals and visions, is to spend more time with family. So for New Year's Eve, we had a New Year's Eve Zoom party. It was fun. And then at the end, I reminded them that we're all going to Greece in May. And that was something that was also created. And I had stated I wanted to travel with them. They started saying, yeah, I want to travel too. And then we came up with Greece. And then serendipitously, can I say that word? I was on a flight with someone for 5.5 hours. And there was something going on with her little dog. And there was like a little community of like 5 of us on the plane that were all kind of together and talking during the flight. And by the end of it, she had let me know that she has a home in Greece, and that anytime I wanted to go there, it was mine without charge. I was just enjoying this woman's company and loving up her dog, Hector. That's as simply as it was. And at the end, that's what she said. And I'm like, she has no idea that my family wants to go to Greece and we want to be together and travel. And so that excitement of that morning saying, how come I'm waiting for someone else to make a decision before I move on with my life? And the things I've done since then was to create and create. So for 2024, it is all about creating and strengthening those relationships that I have, making them 10-10 if they're not top relationships, but also having those moments that we remember. Because, in years to come, we can say, remember when we went to Greece, and that's going to be super fun. So yeah, that idea of expansion, all the stuff that we've talked about today and I've shared today, it's all about that. And it's really exciting to me to know that we can change our energy vibration and attract what we want at any time. But it really starts within us. It starts with our heart and being open to possibility. And it starts with being vulnerable and telling our friends and family that we love them. Love you, sister. She's on here right now. And I hope that you guys get to know Patricia one day. She's amazing comedic personality, serious too, and she's doing amazing things. She created a reconciliation forest project. And so how many reconciliation forests are there out there?
So there's 18 that are existing and 33 more coming on board, and we've partnered with the David Suzuki Foundation and looking at other partnerships this year. So it's super exciting, and I'm excited about it. National Healing Forests Initiative.
Yeah, so you might not know David Suzuki in the United States, but David Suzuki is a big name in environmentalism. And so my sister has leadership. I've invited her to, to participate in some of the leadership programs I've been a part of, because I'm like, if you want to up, you're already a leader, but if you want to up your leadership and expand, like, you have to come on board. So I'm hoping that she will. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm certainly proud of what she's been achieving. And I'm like, wow, what would she do if she had the kind of support that I've been experiencing with the different leadership programs? Like, it's going to be amazing. So so I'm excited. Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate that I had the opportunity to talk about boundaries and what I've learned with creating boundaries in my own life, which, as I said, I believe it's leadership and standing firm in your values and knowing who you are and knowing what you'll accept and what you won't in your life. And I think those are really important and strong concepts that that in our family historically wasn't always there because of the history of and it's not just in our family, it's in all Indigenous families across Canada. And even I know it's happened in the United States as well because of the legacy of residential school. So in my family, we're shifting, we're doing our own healing work. Everybody's doing something different. But it's certainly the common thing we have in our family is coming together to have those 10-10 relationships. And I think really because we were separated as kids and the government was involved, I think really we've missed each other. We've just missed each other because I see a few pictures. I don't have lots of pictures, but a few pictures of us as children, and we're super happy. We're happy being together. And I think we're creating that happiness again. So, yeah.
Well, I can't wait to hear when you guys are going to Greece. And I want to see that picture juxtaposed, you as a kid and you as adults. What a beautiful story.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
What a beautiful story to share on how when you created boundaries, you really created expansion in life and possibilities. Beautiful.
Yeah, and when you know it works, you just keep duplicate what you know works. And so I'm really excited for 2024. It definitely is going to be a much bigger year than 2023. And I had some pretty big breakthroughs in 2023. So on that note, as I said, I committed to being here with you today for 90 minutes, and I have to get ready for a little road trip for tomorrow. So thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And I look forward. By the way, can I share the recording once? Like, am I able to share the recording?
As soon as we're done here, the YouTube one will be available, and I will be posting it on my channels, and I'll put it on PhD also.
Okay.
For our team to get to see.
Okay. Well, we'll see you later this evening.
Yeah.
So great to meet you. Thank you.
Nice to meet you, Angelica. Okay. Bye-bye.
An honor having you ladies on.
Should I just exit now then?
Yes, I love you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay,
see you soon. So Angelica. Hold on. Let me give my husband access to the microwave. But before I do that, Angelica, I wanted you to share anything else that came up. You talked about it feeling yucky, right? When you realized that you forgot that you were not following and setting your boundaries. And that happens often to us, right? We were in a training together, and we were able to unlock all the limiting beliefs that were holding us back. We were able to really go in deep and see where we were the causation of the dis-ease in our lives, right? And so I think it's really important to remember that yes, we get caught in what we call the drift, right? The norms of what the world, everybody else is feeling. And then sometimes we feel like, for me anyway, let me talk for me. When I start to have this conversation of the new me, the discovered me, like falling in love with myself again, I do feel like sometimes it comes up and people going, what? Who are you? Like, where, like, but and it's interesting because my daughter, she gave me a really great compliment. She's like, Mom, like your words are so powerful. Thank you. Like oh my gosh, I know that you're really helping. You see how you're helping yourself, and you're going to inspire so many people. And this is my daughter, and it's so important, like the words we choose and how we describe ourselves, how we talk to ourselves in those moments of feeling something didn't work out. So you want to talk a little bit about that, like even having boundaries with yourself of what you're willing.
Yeah, it's so
yourself to
funny. I wrote down this morning, one of the things that I have found that you get to be curious about, is your language, is how are you speaking to yourself and how are you speaking to others. And the beautiful thing, as Cynthia shared when she was getting ready to leave, is that once you discover what works for you, you get to go right back to it. If you fall off track, if and when, because it is inevitable that you are going to get off track a little bit in one place or another, and that's okay. But the importance is knowing what works and getting back. So the language of how are you speaking to yourself, going back to that, of in the past, my self-talk was very negative. And so when do I find myself in moments of self beat up, of, not loving myself, and where do I get to switch what I'm saying? Because our words, our thoughts create our reality. So if you are not happy with what you created, with where you are in this moment, you get to go back and see, how are you creating that? And that can be challenging for people to acknowledge that you've created the life that you're living, because they're like, well, why would I have wanted XYZ for myself?
Especially people with trauma, right? Because you think like, how is that? That's outside.
How did I source that? Like, why would I have wanted this to happen to me? Why would I want to be living that way? And it's the underlying belief system that you have, that's in my belief, and what I find to be true for me, sourced that into your existence. So you're sourcing everything into your existence. If you're saying, I'm poor, I don't have money, I can't do this, you're right. You're 1,000% correct, because you've already said and declared that cannot happen. And if you get to shift that, oh, I can have abundance, I can create this, well, you're opening up to the magnitude of all that's possible. And it may not show up in the way that you think it will, but it gets to show up. So you get to like take account of that. So, in the respects of boundaries, of going back on like, what was I creating? And where was I not holding a boundary and creating the dis-ease in that moment?
So, so you go inward, like walk me through like the process that you went through when you called me with those boundaries and realized that it was a boundary.
Yes. So there were several things that came up. I had said that I was going to speak on one of the first episodes that you did of this, and I somehow sourced in, not somehow, I know exactly, because resistance showed up. I sourced in more work for me to do, so I couldn't show up. And that was weighing on my heart, that I wasn't in the integrity of my word in that moment. Like I said that I would be there, I would show up, and I wasn't. So that was on my heart. I transitioned into an additional position with my mentor, and I was working, and I went full mode into checking off the boxes of work, and I was stressed out. I was not taking care of myself. I was having actual breakdowns, physical and mental breakdowns, because I wasn't caring for myself. And it was probably less than a week, probably 3-4 days. But around that time, I was like, I can't do this. Like, what is going on? I'm having a breakdown. I'm like, I can't do this. And I said, okay, well, what's coming up? What am I doing? And I was like, okay, well, I really can't immediately wake up out of bed and go onto my desk and start working. There's no space for me. And then that spiraled into the thought of, oh, well, what has been the routines of my last couple days? Just working 10, 12 hours. That does not serve me in my authentic self. So I had written down in November, I started to go through and be like, what do I want to create each day? What are the feelings I want? I want to create fun, laughter, connection to myself, to my higher self, to source. And then what are the ways that I get to do that? And I was checking in that all of those things that fill me up, that I want my day to create and to look like and feel like, none of that was happening. So I said, okay, well, and through some conversations with people from our leadership group, I got to talk it out and really see that I was letting those boundaries slip because I was old stories coming up. I was subconsciously looking to please, to show my worth, because I can only be worthy if I do all of this work, which is not true. But that was the story that was coming up, is that I have to show that I'm good enough, that I am worthy. And the way I get to do that is through all of this work. And I said, whoa. These are some old stories that are coming up. And I said, let's pivot. Because as soon as I got to bring awareness to the situation, I then gained the control and the power to have the choice to switch, to choose something different.
Wow.
And then I called you and I was like, hey, I have a breakdown to clear up. Let's talk about boundaries. And you said yes.
Yeah, and that's so funny because at the end of the last call, like, I don't even know what the topic is, but I'm sure it'll come to me. And then literally within not even an hour, I get your call and your message. And I was like, wow, like for me, that just shows when you're in alignment with your truth,
Mm-hmm.
there's expansion that gets created in that, and possibilities come at you.
Yeah.
Especially when you're not just focused inward, but also focused inward to help others so that they can, and then you focus outward. And so what I heard you say was you took the time to actually go inward and see where it was. And and is it something that you would have had even remotely one or two ways of doing that without going through this leadership program you went through? Like, would you have been aware that you were calling the same story over again and then that you had the power to shift?
I will say that I've done similar work. The work that I do is similar work to the work that we've done in our leadership. And the thing that the leadership program really brought to me in addition was more power in my voice and more connection and community that I wouldn't have been able to really necessarily feel comfortable reaching out, because yes, I'm in a community, but the women that I got to reach out to, that I'm connected with, that's what I sourced in through that training, is that comfortability, the connection, that voice. And I got to stand in my voice and my power and being seen with them. So it was definitely a combination, because I feel that I wouldn't have been able to do that leadership training without the work that I did. And I wouldn't be where I am in the work that I do without the leadership training, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it sounds just like me, up until I did hardcore leadership, I had already done a lot of work, where I was in enlightenment courses and I was going inward, doing healing, even talk therapy. And then I realized when I kept hearing what this program can bring, I was just like, I just knew in my heart of hearts that this was the little key that was still missing. And it's interesting because, like, even now I'm in the graduate program of the leadership program. I'm like even uncovering more of my power, because now I'm realizing, wow, everything is what I create in source. Everything does come from doing the work and going inward and acknowledging that you are worthy. And that was the first step for me, was acknowledging my worth. And I loved what you said earlier. You said about having to do all these things, being the people pleaser, because that's where you found your worth. And I'm like, wow, I feel like I'm still doing that right now. Right. So I get to get underneath that. So thank you for presencing that for me, because I am finding that I'm breaking my word because I want to people please. And I want to be like, well, I'm good enough if I say yes to this over here, even though I really, like, today my day is full. I just flew in and got home at 2 a.m. to get up, get my kids to school, get their lunch and snacks done, and then get on this call. And I was just like, and it's interesting, earlier, I first started the conversation by saying, if you're not wanting to quit 30 times a day, you're not playing a big enough game. And this is all it is for me. When I feel like I want to just call everybody and go, I'm not going to do the call today, I'm like, well, what's underneath that?
The resistance.
What's the resistance?
Yeah.
That is coming up for me.
Yep. That was this morning. I was like, oh, I'm a little nauseous. I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, I'm not canceling, because this is outside of your comfort zone of going outside of the box and breaking through.
And that's where growth for me has been living, is going outside myself, like just jumping and doing the 3-day mastermind, having a week and a half to plan it, was me just going, yeah, I'm waiting for someone else to save me and tell me how to do it. And it's like, my mother-in-law said to me at this vacation, she was like, at what point are you going to stop learning and spending money on all this learning? Because I was consuming so much information because it was outside of me. The answer was outside of me up until then. And when I realized the answer really wasn't here, and just falling back into my truth, and it was interesting. In the beginning, I had a really hard time understanding what that was or what it looked like. But when I thought of myself as a kid, what did my younger self, my 6-year-old self want? Is when I rediscovered, oh, that's my true self, I think.
Before we piled on the stories.
Who did I want to be? How was I showing up? And unfortunately, I know not a lot of people have a childhood where they felt safe, at that age and free. And, but like there's if you think back at those thoughts that you had outside of the trauma, outside of the circumstances around you, like you still had ideas and beliefs about yourself that were yours, right? And then we started attaching negative situations about who we were because of other people telling us, or how other, and then I realized, like, wow, that was just other people's deal and traumas being bestowed onto me. And not they're children. I don't know if you have children. Do you have children? No.
Just a cat.
Children really expose that for us. They're in our face as all these limiting beliefs and ideas. And it's interesting when I can get outside of my expectation, I can see my kid being a kid, not a little punk trying to do everything in his will to make my life miserable and say no to me. Like, yeah, I was like that too. And that's so interesting when I can just be grounded in my intention for my kid and to hear them. And I'm realizing that there's no boundaries, right? Up until now, we really were like wishy-washy with our boundaries. And a lot of this because I didn't want to come off really harsh, right? Because that was at the time, I thought boundaries were like me being cold and saying no all the time. But I'm realizing that it was, just what you're willing to tolerate. And so this year, my husband and I were like, 24 is changing. There's going to be boundaries. There's going to be shift. You guys get to do the work to get what you want, right? Because I also feel like with parenting, there's a fine line about reward versus punishment. I think for me, if I was a child, I would be so happy to work toward the reward than be afraid of what a punishment would be if I don't do this. There's more power. Yeah. Like I'm empowering the children by saying, hey, if you do, 2 hours of reading or you do the chores, you get to have an allowance or you get to have the screen or whatever that looks like, right? And I think that creates connection as opposed to disconnect. And there's love in that. And that's another boundary, right? Boundaries look all kinds of ways, but I think the boundary that I heard you clearly say was having a boundary with yourself and going, hey, something doesn't feel right. What's going on? Something's not feeling right within me that I created myself, right?
Yeah. And it's really, it's really important to, I will say, incorporate the connection to your body, your mind, and whatever higher power it is, because it's all collective. And knowing if our body is our biggest messenger in our human form, what is your body telling you? Because you get to like really tune in. And before I started doing this work, I was so disconnected from my body. I was numb. There were parts of me that I just didn't feel because that's just, that was my protection. That was my, that was my safety on how I chose to live. And I didn't realize until I started to do the work and dive in. And like, that's where it's like, okay, well, if something doesn't feel right, or if something's happening in your body, like it, and I keep saying this throughout this class, but that's what is so strong for me, is to get curious on what's happening. And it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be a reactive moment to what's coming up. Everything is, you get to experience it in no judgment. Okay, like this is coming up. Like, well, why is this coming up? And allowing yourself to be curious is going to be the gift of the breakthrough in that. Because if you take it, it's never just the surface level thing that's coming up. It's deeper to the root of the problem. You have the symptom, and then you have the root. And that's what you get to be curious of, like, what is causing this?
Yeah. And up until the leadership program taught me about neutrality, being neutral. And that's what gave me the feeling of being safe to go inward, right? Because up until then, I still had an unworthy conversation. I'm not worthy enough to do anything for myself. Why am I going to go in? And then there's also that scary part. Well, I'm a monster. I don't want to know really like how bad I am, you know, because we get into self beat up.
Yeah.
And so that word curious has really saved me, because it really is
Yes.
about a curiosity about what is it true? Is it a story? Is it a belief that I had? Is it my belief? Is it true? Is it real? Is it made up? Like all these things, just getting curious about it. And I was able to reveal for me that a lot of what I was doing and how I was operating was coming from that unworthy space.
Yeah. And what the beautiful thing that was brought up to me in our leadership program, which I will say was a huge gift and is a huge gift, is when we got to speak on integrity of our word. And I remember very clearly when it was brought up, I was like, I have very good integrity. I stay to my word. I'm like a punctual person. If I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. And then I realized that all of those scenarios, somebody else was involved that I was keeping my word to. And when I got to reflect in the moment of how is my integrity with myself, I said, oh, that's where I get to work, because my integrity for anybody else. And that's where I was like, that's my people pleaser. And I was like, oh, my breakthrough is to keep my word to myself on. And that was huge for me with my boundaries of like, I'm creating this space for me, and I'm not going to give up this space and time that serves me for you, because I can create space for you later. It doesn't have to be in this moment. I don't have to sacrifice myself. And that's where I got to really look at my commitments and my integrity of my word to myself and build on that. And that was one of my huge breakthroughs through that leadership, because I never really noticed the inward version of the integrity that I got to look at.
Ooh, I know that there are so many people that are so blessed to be able to hear you share that story, because for me, just the same, you know, I knew the difference is that I knew I wasn't being my word with myself. And that was like the biggest thing. It's like, okay, I get it. I show up for people and I could still break my word to people, right? But then I was never doing any of the things that I knew were good for me. Self-care, all the stuff that I knew was going to fill me up so I could show up, I wasn't doing. And so I got curious about like, what is it? What is the story that I'm saying that I'm fulfilling by not being my word? Where is my blind spot? And sometimes you can't figure it out on your own. You get to have mentors and coaches and people like that who are going to love you up and see you in your light and be mutually honest with you. You know,
and
like,
the accountability of it, of like, okay, well, like, let's have this conversation. Let's be real. And like, I'm going to call you out on your BS in this moment, and having that open, loving dialogue and space of like, when I go into these conversations, they're not saying anything to be mean, to be hurtful, any malicious intent. They're saying it of service, of like, let me help you with this flashlight, of shining a light on what's coming up right now, because it's a blind spot for you. And that is the beauty of this work of doing and being the transformation. You get to create the community of transformation. So you have those lifelines, you have the support, you have the connections to continue, because it is a forever journey. Like, one of my life missions is raising the world's vibration one person at a time. And it is a continual journey that we all get to be a part of as a collective.
That's beautiful. I look forward to doing some more work with you and collaborating more with you. Maybe next time you can give us a little sample of what neural Reiki healing looks like for us.
Yeah.
You told me that, I was like, oh, I want to know more. That's amazing. And it's what's great about this kind of work though, is that it really is simple and it comes down to a choice. Would you agree?
Yes. Yeah. It is the simplest and most challenging work that you get to do. It's because the work is easy. It's the doing it, the allowing yourself to get out of that comfort zone, to know that your ego and resistance is that's what's holding you back, and you get to break through that and learn to trust.
Yeah, and we believe it's our identity. We don't want to let it go, right? It's
Yeah.
like, well, it's a little scary. Like, who am I going to be?
Yeah.
If I go in or release this. But I must say that I'm noticing all the beautiful magic that is being created because of my shift in identity, my shift in my ways of being, and all because I went inward, took care of myself, I'm starting to create boundaries as I come up. And I also have grace with myself when I have a slip up, because I'm, lived my whole life in this pattern, and it's going to take some time. It's going to take,
Yeah.
it's not a one and done. Like you said, it's not a one and done. It's not a, one person's going to give you all the answers, because it doesn't work that way either. So like, I love what you said about what HCL gave you, was this community.
Yes.
Of people that are like-minded, who are going to hold you high, who are also are able to that know how a gift of feedback, the gift of feedback. We know the gift of feedback, and what's beautiful about it is that we can go, hey, can I give you some feedback? And it's up to you to say yes or no, right? And that's like the first question. It's like, hey, this is my experience of you.
Yeah.
It was such a blessing. At first, it was hard to hear because it felt like attacks, but I was just like, you realize that we were really just there to be mirrors for one another. Back to what you said, right? Being those mirrors in a place that was safe, in a place that was loving, and in a place that we were all with one another being mirrors for each other.
Yes.
It's not like it was just me being the attack, the one feeling attacked. And so when that happened, I realized what gave me peace was that I realized how so alike I was with every 44 people in the room. I was like everybody. Every time somebody shares something about this, I'm like, just like me. Oh my God, yes, just like me. And so when we understand we're so alike, when we realize that we really are people that are carrying fears, and I feel like I say this in every call, we are all the same, carrying fears, wanting to be seen and heard, and figuring out where we fit in or belong.
Yeah.
But when we start to really see people in that light, I think that's where peace and love can spread and generate and raise everyone's vibration almost all at once.
Yes.
So with that, I invite everybody out there to get curious. I invite everyone out there to have grace and go inward. If you want to create expansion and abundance in your life, we go inward to see where it is that we're not giving it to ourselves first. When we can give it to ourselves, we're able to give it to others. Put on the oxygen mask first. You cannot survive when you're giving too much of yourself out there without giving yourself love. And when you start to find or feel your place of being in resistance, where things are showing up in conflict, get curious and go inwards and how maybe you're doing things that are not aligning with your truth, not aligning with your authenticity and your values, as Cynthia said. So with this, I hope to see you. We're going to start moving down to 2 times a month for this call instead of a weekly call. So I thank you so much for being here, Angelica. Beautiful shares. Kelly Mallinson, who was here earlier, and Sister, your shares were amazing. Thank you for coming here and being and giving generosity to talk on a subject that I think, you know, like Danielle said, oh, I don't believe in boundaries, and sometimes people don't even know what boundaries look like. So I hope that this call today helped to bridge that gap for you. And now it's your choice. The ball, you know, it's your turn now. It's your choice to create the magic in your life. Thank you.